Unsanctioned Dialogues. May the truth set you free. Some might say, you can't handle the truth. I'm your host, Brent Raines, and I think you're ready. And in this installment of Unsanctioned Dialogues, our very special guest is Timothy Green Beckley, a very long-time researcher, editor, and publisher of the UFO and paranormal phenomenon. My guest this evening, May 23rd, a Tuesday, 2017, is Timothy Green Beckley, now living in New York City. We always knew for years he was was it Brunswick, New Jersey, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the site of my post office box. I don't give out my street address for reasons literally of security. I have been, I won't say constantly harassed, but I've had a couple of incidents that could be considered fairly dangerous or threatening. Not necessarily by the MIB, but by radical fandom. I guess you would call it that. You know, not everybody in the UFO and paranormal field is as stable and well-adjusted as you and I.
Oh, me. Well, I've seen some evidence of that, but I'm hiding out here deep in the hills of Tennessee, so I don't think...
Well, there you go.
But you know, I was years ago when I was a young man. I was going through New Jersey on the way to Florida with my parents, and I believe it was like July 1969, and we passed a car on the interstate that had UFO on the license plate. I don't suppose that was you, was it?
No, but you know who that might be? Pat Marcatilio. Pat Marcatilio has been a longtime student of the phenomena, and he holds this conference twice a year in Bordentown, New Jersey. I believe his license plate says Dr. UFO.
Okay, well, yeah, I just remember UFO because this was years ago, but that's sort of...
No, but I have a synchronicity, which I will get into in a little while, which is a parallel and a lot, very, very, very just spooky and unusual, as most of the synchronicities that have occurred in my time have been.
Well, I remember years ago, Dr. Berthold Schwartz, eminent psychiatrist from Montclair, New Jersey, who...
Excellent researcher.
Right, he wrote the book UFO Dynamics, 2-volume book, and delved deeply into the UFOs, and actually was introduced to the UFO field by John Keel. You know, he'd been, in 1968, Dr. Schwartz had written up 4 cases of UFO experiencers that he'd interviewed for a medical journal, and he planned for that to be the end of it, and anyway, Paul Harvey broadcast a story on it, and John Keel, I think the way it went, he got wind of it and contacted Dr. Schwartz and, you know, said, no, you need to stay in this field, because, you know, Dr. Schwartz was already delving deeply into parapsychology, and, you know, John Keel told him there's a lot for him to do in the UFO field.
Well, you know, I have a copy. I've got 5,000 books in my collection, I would assume here, right? And I have a copy of his UFO Dynamics about a foot away from where I am. And that article that you just mentioned, I actually did an entire column for Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine based on the research that went into that particular article that he wrote for the medical journal. So I'm well aware of him and his research, and of course we both investigated the case of Stella Lansing, which to this day remains one of the most puzzling UFO cases out there. I mean, her ability to, well, we did a book recently called UFO Repeaters, The Camera Doesn't Lie, about people who seem to have the uncanny ability to be able to go out in the daytime or at night point their camera at the sky. Sometimes they'll see something bizarre. Sometimes they'll see nothing at all. And a wide variety of objects, shapes, and dimensions and beings will appear on their photographs or on the digital camera now, depending upon the technology that's used. And of course, Stella Lansing had some of the most bizarre photographs of clocks and faces and things that, if you recall, Brent, that even went through the frames where it's totally technologically impossible to photograph anything. I mean, an 8mm or a 16mm frame is a frame, but hers would cross over from one frame to another. Totally uncanny, totally bizarre. And of course, I believe the two of them had an encounter one evening with the Men in Black.
Yeah, there was the incident where they were filming a UFO. I believe it was two of them, and Stella had taken Dr. Swartz to one of her lookout sites, as I recall, and
yeah, New England, Massachusetts or New Hampshire, I believe.
Yeah, Massachusetts, and this appeared, and they were filming it, and then there was suddenly this dark car just came out of nowhere and was doing like it was signaling Morse code to the lights or something, and yeah, this. It's interesting. I made I guess a couple trips down there to meet with Stella and film it. I never had any really extraordinary experiences myself, but I knew that there were others who had shared, seeing things while in her presence. And
well, let me tell you a little story here, since part of the subject of our conversation this evening is synchronicities and coincidence. Now, I take responsibility for, if there is such a thing, as discovering Stella Lansing. Now, Jim Moseley had monthly UFO meetings in New York. He would rent a room in a hotel like around Times Square, when you can rent a room for $50 and held 125 people, as opposed to the $900 or $1,000 they would charge you today, right? That's why there are no more meetings. Anyway, I was his assistant. I was managing editor of Saucer News, and I helped him unfold the chairs, and he would have me kind of act as his liaison to people he didn't either want to speak to or was too busy to talk with. So now, one evening, this lady came up to me, and she said she had some 8mm motion picture footage that she wanted to show in front of Jim's group at some point, and to give a presentation. And so Jim didn't seem, I mentioned this to Jim, and he didn't seem too impressed by it, but I told him I had seen the footage, and I thought it was very strange, and the lady, Stella Lansing, seemed to be very articulate, so more so than I am. Articulate.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
So we should give her an opportunity to at least take the microphone and the podium for about an hour or so, and to make her presentation. Well, she gave her presentation, and the audience was stunned by the revelations that she presented. And there was a great deal of interest in what she had to say. Well, the next thing I know, a couple of months later, APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, is giving a conference or a seminar in Baltimore, Maryland. So now, Jim Moseley, myself, and Greg Barker hooked up with us, and we decided to go. Well, now, Jim and Carl Lorenzen, who were head of APRO, had a total dislike of Jim Moseley, who, of course, had a reputation for being the court jester of ufology. They did not get along. To say it was like fire and water is to be kind about the whole situation. Anyway, we went down to Baltimore, and I met Bob Hieronymus for the first time, and he showed me his absolutely fabulous murals that are on the wall there of John Hopkins. I had him on my show as a guest just recently, and there was a meeting or a special workshop that was going to be held by APRO at the hotel, but it was a closed session only for the APRO's inner circle. So Jim and Gray decided they're going to crash the meeting. And of course, I kind of went along with it. I didn't see any reason why not to. I mean, what could be so personal and so private about an event that's being held in a hotel? Anyway, we get to the room where the closed session is being held, and lo and behold, who is making the presentation but Stella Lansing? So we had to have a good laugh at this because we knew her material almost by heart because she had lectured for Jim's group. Anyway, when Coral Lorenzen found out that Gray Barker and Jim Mosley were in the room, I don't think she was too well aware of me or who I was at that point. She had security, mainly her husband, Jim, show them or us to the door. So we had a kind of a chuckle about this and brought it up over the years as something that was very funny because what APRO deemed information that could only be told to insiders was something that had already been presented in front of a auditorium with about 125 people in it.
Yeah.
Anyway, at that point, I think in the this had to be in the early 1970s or late 1960s. I don't remember the exact year. But APRO was the #2 UFO organization in the country, if not the world. Now, they didn't have a huge membership. In fact, they had about 15 or 16 or 1,700 members, and I had as many subscribers to my little mimeograph newsletter, the Interplanetary Service Report, as they had members in APRO. NICAP, of course, was a big group with about 7,000 or 8,000 members. They were based out of Washington, D.C., and Major Kehoe had all this impressive board of directors made up of admirals and CIA types and military personnel, and were, decades ahead of trying to get UFO, I was going to say exposure, but disclosure. APRO, on the other hand, collected, they were big on international reports and having all these the sightings translated into English. And they had correspondents all over the world. They were especially big on humanoid reports from like South America and Mexico and so forth, where NICAP was only interested in so-called credible reports from pilots, police officers, and men of letters, academia, and so forth. Anyway, APRO, Jim and Coral Lorenzen both were deceased, and the organization folded. I can't tell you the specific year, but it's been 3 decades ago. Anyway, a couple of times a year, or once a year if I can do it, I travel out to Tucson, which is where APRO was based. I have a lot of friends, people there that are tied up with the various UFO organizations. One gentleman in particular by the name of Alan Benz, it turns out he was the librarian for APRO. Now, we had a conversation. Okay, I went out there to give a talk. He has a little UFO group that meets annually, and he's the promoter of UFO World Day, which is held around the anniversary of Kenneth Arnold sighting in June. Right? Okay, so it turns out, and most people don't realize this, as I mentioned, Alan Benz was a librarian for APRO for a number of years, and he was in charge of maintaining their files. Well, he gets a call one day from Coral or Jim Lorenzen that they have been contacted by Paramount Studios, who are planning a full-length Hollywood feature on UFOs, and they claim they want to, and I use it in quotes, get it right. So I guess they wanted some assistance from APRO to give them information where they could base a story upon. Well, they decided they didn't have time to do this, so they gave the job to their trusty librarian, Alan Benz. Well, it turns out, Brent, that the movie was Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Ah.
And, and Alan spent some time with them on the telephone. I think he might have even gone to see Paramount to the offices in Hollywood, but I can't remember now exactly if that were the case or he just did it on the telephone. But he gave them a lot of information, from the APRO files, and they were very well pleased with it. And they wanted to make sure that whatever incidents were used in the movie, that even if they had creative license, that it would be based on historical fact and not fictionalized to the extent that, Independence Day or something might be. So, not that Alan ever got any credit, and I don't think, and certainly APRO nor he ever got any
recognition,
money for the hours that they spent on the project. And as it turned out, I believe somehow Paramount turned the movie over to Universal. And originally, it was only going to be released in 916 theaters around the country, which is actually a very small opening for a major cinema release. The idea being that if the movie bombed, that they would not lose money by making all those extra prints and having to ship them all over the country and so forth. But of course, as it turned out, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is still one of the top 10, 12 movies of all time.
Yeah, it didn't bomb.
And the movie was a huge success, of course. In fact, it's on, I think, Netflix and Amazon, and I've got 3 copies in various editions here in my office. And so I questioned Alan about that because I had been involved kind of on the fringes with the movie. I was the UFO editor of their glossy Close Encounters poster magazine. I think there was 4 or 5 issues of it, and you opened up this magazine type thing, and it came out to be a giant photo, I don't know, 20 by 20 or 24 by 24 of the mothership and the aliens and things like that. And then they put out an actual magazine and a book and so forth and so on. And I did a couple of shows, even with Bob Balaban at the time that the film, came out. And I always enjoyed the movie. It's maybe next to The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original one, of course, the best UFO movie, that Hollywood has made that I can think of.
Right. So now so then
yeah.
I was just going to say that, of course, Dr. Alan Hynek became the major consultant for Close Encounters. So I guess that must have happened after APRO kind of.
I don't know if Hynek was really a consultant. He's the one that came up with the terms. The Close Encounters of the First Kind, Close Encounters of the Second Kind.
Right.
And of course, he had a cameo appearance, in the film where he's sitting there puffing on his
on top of Devil's Tower, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so about I don't know, 4 years ago or so, I'm down in Tucson and I'm interviewing Alan about his involvement in the film and his involvement with APRO as a librarian. After the conversation, I had been there for about maybe 3 days. I hooked up with my friend Charla, who is my photographer there. I mean, we go on trips together. We go up to Sedona and different places and chronologue our journeys. And we've been to Sedona a few times, and of course, it's one of the more mystical places around the country. So it's about maybe about a 4-hour drive from Tucson, and you even get the opportunity to go through the town of Jerome. Now, the town of Jerome is known for having more ghosts than actual humans that are alive living there now. There's supposed to be 444, that's the population, but there are dozens and dozens of ghosts, gunslingers, miners, a couple of prostitutes who got killed. It was, in the old days, what we would call a wide open mining town. And they've had some UFO sightings there because, as we know, treasure does seem sometimes to attract weird aerial phenomena. And there's all kinds of gold mines, silver mines, platinum mines, copper mines. They're all, I think, idle now. The town is a tourist, a place where tourists go to see if they can, see a ghost. And there are ghost tours and ghostly manors and ghostly hotels and things along that line. Anyway, we stopped over there, and then we headed to Sedona, which is another couple of miles down the road. It's a kind of a long, twisting, mountainous road part of the ways, and so you have to slow down. You can't really speed up too fast in most places. Anyway, now Sedona is a kind of an art colony, but it's also known as the hub of the New Age, especially in the Southwest. People go there to meditate. They go there to bury crystals. They have UFO sky watches. In fact, if anybody wants to see a really good interview that I did, they can go to Mr. UFO's Secret Files on YouTube. That's our channel. And there's a very nice interview that we did with Tom Dongo. I don't know if you've had Tom on your show, but
I have in the past.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Well, he has a huge scrapbooks full of all kinds of UFO photos that he has taken or people have given him that have been, have appeared in and above Sedona. There have been UFO crashes there. There have been cryptoid creatures seen walking across the main road through town. Shirley MacLaine has, or used to have, I don't know if she still has it or not, has some property there. So it's a New Age community, except that the locals who are the old timers don't like to have the New Agers barge in on them. I guess they don't get the full feel of the crystals or the vortex. Sedona is supposed to be made up of, I don't know, 6 or 7 vortexes where all these strange things happen.
Right.
Anyway, on the way into town, there's a popular stopping off a point called the Coffee Pot, where everybody kind of meets up. Great coffee, great brunch, and 103 omelets to choose from. My favorite is the number 103 omelet. It's peanut butter and jelly. Now, I may sound queer, but it's a little bit more palatable than some of the others.
Have you tried all of them yet?
We've had some other mystical experiences in that area. But here's the unusual thing. That afternoon, after visiting with Alan Benz, we stopped at the Coffee Pot, had our brunch. I think it was probably Sunday brunch. Headed out into the parking lot. And right next to where the vehicle that we had driven in, that Charlotte was driving, is another automobile, and it's sticking out a little bit further than it should, in where you park your car. And we happened to look at it and mention that the person is probably not the greatest driver in the world, or they would have pulled in a little bit more. And lo and behold, there on the license plate, the back license plate of the vehicle parked right next to us in giant letters is APRO. APRO. Now, as I have mentioned, the organization has not existed probably for 3 decades. Now, it's possible that somebody in Tucson or that area is still a fan of APRO and decided to get a vanity license plate, I think they call it, right? With that stamped on it. Okay, that's a possibility, but what's the possibility that this vehicle with the license plate would be parked next to us in the parking lot of a restaurant? Totally, the odds of it are like winning the lottery if there were such a thing. So we took a photograph of the license plate so that people didn't think we were making up the story. In fact, I sent you a copy of it today for an article for your publication. There's the license plate, APRO. And this synchronicity, this form of synchronicity or so-called coincidence, has a rippling effect throughout the paranormal and throughout ufology, and it's something that has followed me from almost day one. I don't know who's behind it. There is some thinking, I don't know, are you familiar with John C. Lilly, the late John C. Lilly?
No.
Okay, well, he wrote the book, The Eye of the Cyclone. He was the first human to actually claim that he was able to communicate with dolphins.
Oh, the dolphin guy. Okay, yeah.
The dolphin guy who used I think a bit of ketamine, known as Special K, an animal tranquilizer, and some of his
and I think he did the flotation thing.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. That's correct. The flotation tanks. He was responsible for that. Anyway, he had an entire series of synchronicities, and he's not the only one, but he came to believe that there was an actual, well, he called it ECHO, ECCO, which he said stood for Earth Coincidence Control Center, that there was actually Charles Fort, always said that we were like pawns in a chess game, that somebody was, controlling at least some of our behavior, and Philip K. Dick, who we did this book about, the Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick, he is responsible for writing a number of best-selling science fiction books that the movies Blade Runner, Total Recall, and my Majority Report were based on. Mm-hmm. And he was convinced that time and reality is a changeable, flexible thing. I mean, that it doesn't have to be static. And he had a number of incidences in his own life, which is described in this book, where he had now some sort of contact with an intelligence from somewhere outside. He believed that we were living in a computerized simulation, and I kind of go along with that. I think that this may be the case. Now, I don't know who's controlling the computer simulation, or if thousands of years ago somebody, ancient astronauts, if you want to call them that, came to the planet and set up maybe some sort of workshop, and then left it on autopilot, and it causes all these weird synchronicities and coincidences to happen. But I've had dozens of them. In fact, the book is 440 pages, and about 80 pages of them are my very spooky, very strange synchronicities. And I'm not talking about thinking of somebody, Brent, and they call on the phone the next day. I mean, I wouldn't even include that. I'm just talking about things that are just totally bizarre and totally strange. And like, for example, years and years ago, I was invited to give a talk in San Francisco, where I had never been before. It was my first trip to the city by the bay, and we had a very nice presentation. It was part of the Congress of Scientific Ufology, even though there was no scientists really involved with the group, but it sounded like a prestigious name and enabled us to get some publicity and all. Anyway, on a Saturday night, I spoke maybe for 300 people. It was a fairly good turnout. And the next day, it was a rather late flight back to Newark Airport from the airport there in San Francisco. So we had some time to kill. I was with the promoter, Dale Redding, and his wife, and a few other people who I don't remember who they are, of course. And we decided to have brunch. Now, Notice how a lot of this revolves around food. and
nothing wrong with that.
But anyway, we picked the place at random. Nobody had ever been in this particular bar, restaurant before. It just seemed like a fairly respectable place for us to go into, and so we did. Okay, so we're having a little chit-chat, a conversation, just idle conversation, nothing special in particular. And I happened to mention, I said, geez, if I had given this some more thought, I might have invited a couple of people who used to live in New York but have moved out here for one reason or another. Now, one of the individuals, I had one of the first metaphysical schools in the country. It was the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences. And we had workshops and seminars and seances, and we had people like Dr. Stanley Krittner, Cleve Baxter, Daniel Logan, people who were very well established, and some people who weren't in the the area of the paranormal.
Yeah,
one of my favorite speakers and workshop presenters was a fellow by the name of Alan Vaughn. I don't know if you recognize the name or not.
I do. He even wrote a book on synchronicity, I think called Incredible Coincidences.
Yes, well, you're taking away the punchline.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Okay. All right. So he had moved from New York to San Francisco because he got a job. Can you imagine that? A paying job as editor of a magazine called Psychic, which was
I remember
financed by some millionaire type who didn't care whether he lost money on magazine publishing or thought maybe he would break even or something. And of course, on magazine publishing, you don't break even.
No.
And the more gloss you put in the magazine, the more you're going to lose. But he didn't realize that, and it was a paying job, and it was something, of course, that he wanted to do. Okay, so I told my friend Dale Redding and his wife and these other people, I should have tried to get in touch with Alan Vaughn because I always liked the guy. He was not snuck up and snooty. You could have a conversation with him that was outside the realm of the paranormal. He'd like to have a good drink or two, have a good a joke, laugh a lot. He was a personable fella. So at some point, about 5 minutes later, the swinging door to the restaurant swings open, and a gentleman comes into the bar leading a dog, or maybe the dog was leading him on a leash. And I said to Dale Redding, Dale, this looks exactly like Alan Vaughn. So I gestured the man over, and it was Alan Vaughn. Now, here's a city with I think close to 900,000, 1 million people or something like that. We invited him over. He sat down. We chatted for a while, and I said, "Well, do you come here often?" He said, "No, man. I was just walking down the street, and I felt the urge to come into the bar and have a Bloody Mary, I think he liked to drink beer on the Bloody Mary at night, I thought I'd come in and, and see what was on the menu and have an early cocktail. So we had a good laugh at that, and I told the story about how we had just been talking about 5 minutes before. And I said, Alan, so what have you been working on? And you stole the punchline. He was working on a book on synchronicity and coincidence. So
of course.
If you open that volume, which I cannot find amongst the 5,000 books here, you will find, I think it's case 37 or 38, a half a page about this incident that I have just described to you. Now, how is that possible that you could be in a city, go into a restaurant where you've never been before, talk about somebody that you haven't seen in 3 or 4 years, and they walk into the door 5 minutes later, and they're working on a book on synchronicity? What the hell is that all about? I mean, it's not coincidence. It has to be arranged. But by who and why is very hard to say. Now, I've got dozens of experiences like this. It goes on and on and on. and one seems to be more amazing than another. If you have time, I'll give you the most recent one.
All righty.
All right. Well, a good friend of mine is a lady by the name of Maria DeAndrea. She's a fairly well established here on a psychic, clairvoyant, and shaman here on the East Coast. She's written about maybe about 15 books for us. Some on time travel. The most recent one is on the use of the Aladdin's the magical lamp and contacting the jinn. All kinds of. She's into occult, but in a very positive way, and a very nice lady. And we spend once in a while we'll take off for a couple of days and head on down the turnpike on the Greyhound bus to Atlantic City. Not that either one of us gamble, because I find gambling totally boring, and you ain't going to win a dime one way or another. And Maria kind of feels the same way. Now, when you get on the Greyhound and you get to your destination, and we usually go to the Tropicana, when you get off the bus, they give you a coupon, which is good for $25 a play in the slot machine. They don't take quarters anymore. There's no clang, 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 where you think that everybody's a big winner except for you, you know? Okay. So, but we go down there because it's on the beach, there's a boardwalk, there's a swimming pool, and the rooms are less than $100 a night, whereas opposed to if you were staying in New York, they'd be $300 a night. So, and you get $25 in compensation to spend in the slot machine if you feel like doing that. It takes your free money inside of 5 minutes, and anything else you put in there, it gobbles it up pretty quickly as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ride on the bus is about 2 hours and 45 minutes from the Port Authority in Times Square, New York. We get on the bus, and it's a nice leisurely trip. You go through the Pine Barrens. Hopefully, you might see the Jersey Devil wandering down the road or something like that, you know. And it's a nice, easy trip, and the bus is usually comfortable and it has Wi-Fi. At some point, about 10 minutes before you get to the hotel, you get off the interstate and you start going through the local streets of Atlantic City. At some point, about 2 or 3 blocks away from the Tropicana, you go past the coffee shop at Colonel Sanders, and there's a bed and breakfast about a block away from the hotel. I believe it's called the Chelsea Pub. And on the roof are statues, metal statues, figures of the Blues Brothers. You know, Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. Now, I'm not exactly sure why they're there, but, Dan Aykroyd, of course, is a big believer in UFOs.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, he did a documentary a couple of years ago. His father, who's still alive and also in show business, they held seances in their home up in Canada. You know, Dan is Canadian. And so Dan used to sit outside the parlor door and watch the mediums and the seances, and I guess that's where he got the idea to write the script for Ghostbusters. And his father, I think about maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, wrote a book on all of this, which I have a copy of here. It's a major publisher. And also, in addition to his interest in UFOs and the paranormal, he also is one of the owners and founders of Crystal Skull Vodka. Now, the vodka comes in a skull, a see-through skull made of glass that looks like a replica of the famous, crystal skull, right?
Right.
And I believe they call it vanity liquor, except that this vodka is so good that it's not vanity liquor, and people actually serve it. You can get it in some of the bars, and it's a little bit pricey, more so than you would pay for some of the other brands, but it's darn good. If you're a vodka drinker, this stuff goes down smoothly. Anyway, so he has an interest in this, and I pointed this out to Maria as we were about ready to pull into the parking area where the bus lets the people off. Now, when you get off the bus, you are greeted by a hostess or host from the hotel who hands you your coupon, good for the $25 to play in the slot machine. But the coupon is no good by itself. You have to go into the lobby of the hotel and present it to one of the, I guess, the tellers behind the cage. The cage with the bars in front, stuff like that. And they will take your coupon and put the money on your membership card, which of course you always lose, so you end up having to get a new one every time you go. Okay, so anyway, there aren't that many people getting off the bus. It's a weekday, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and we walk over to the cage to give them our coupon and get our card updated. And the loudspeaker in this room where these cages are is playing pre-programmed music. There's no disc jockey there or anything. It's like Pandora or something. God knows where the music is even coming from. Well, what does it start playing, Brent, but the theme song to Ghostbusters? Here we are stepping up to the cage. We have just seen the statues of Dan Aykroyd on the roof of the Chelsea pub 2 blocks away, and the music coming over the sound system, just like you would hear in an elevator, is the theme to Ghostbusters. How is that possible? There are 50 million other songs, and I'm just pulling that number out of my hat, that could have been played just by random. This is a random selection. It's not like somebody saw us come into the room, not that they would know that what we were talking about anyway, right? It just blows the mind. And there's one instance right after another. So I'm not talking about, like running into somebody on the street that you were thinking about. I'm talking about hardcore synchronicities that have to be programmed by someone somewhere, either on purpose or randomly.
Yeah, Anthony Peake over in England, he's been writing a lot of material, a lot of books in the last few years, dealing with all kinds of things, deja vu and the brain hemispheres and quantum physics and all these, and synchronicity, all these things that happen to people. And he first became interested years ago, and I did an initial interview with him back in 2007, and he was interested in deja vu experiences where people suddenly saw things that were about to happen just, ahead in the future, precognition and things. And he got very interested in that, and he called it the daemon, which is like the right side of the brain that has insights and knowledge that the normal left just, doesn't really possess, and occasionally there are triggers for it. One may be temporal lobe epilepsy, but he's written a book about a year ago on Philip K. Dick as well. And,
is that right? There is this is another synchronicity. I found out, I do my show live every Thursday, Exploring the Bizarre, which of course is then archived on YouTube. And somebody had mentioned to me that there was going to be a Philip K. Dick Film Festival the week that our book was due to come out, right? So I said, well, I've got to get the organizer of the event on my show, which I did the other night. His name is Daniel Bella. I had not met him previously. Now, this is the 5th year of the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. I vaguely heard about it last year because Peter Robbins was on the program. But this year they're actually bringing in Dr. Jacques Vallée and Harold Pudoff to be part of the program. And the program basically consists of about, 40 or 50 science fiction shorts and documentaries, and I think that the program that the Valet and Puthoff is going to be part of is part of a screening of a film about, oh boy, the very well-known remote viewer, and his name just skips my mind. Who's a good friend of John Keel and wrote a book, and he's always mentioned he's deceased now. But I mean, again, here the event is going to be held on the weekend. My book is coming out, you know.
Well, when you get a chance, I got a synchronicity to tell you.
All right, go ahead. I'm up. Your turn.
Well, this, after interviewing Anthony Peake, I was so impressed with his talk. They had a little quote on tape. I was going to play it to this group down in Florence, Alabama, that I was meeting with once a month at the time, and we would also have introduced different subjects. And so I hadn't told anybody what was on this tape, and it was my phone conversation, a part of my phone conversation with Anthony Peake. And in the conversation, we got talking about, he was telling me about how a psychologist in California would hypnotize someone, and they suddenly this other personality came through and told him things that was really shocked him. Seemed quite knowledgeable and stuff, and knew things that he was supposed to be under this hypnotic control, and he wasn't. And I started talking to him about John Keel, Long Island, 1967, Apple that came through and predicted plane crashes. And he got all excited and said, that's the daemon, this, what he calls the right hemisphere of the brain. He says it's capable under hypnosis of coming through with this information, it can see the future and all this. And so I had that section of recording, or some part of that conversation that we'd had, and he also told me if I saw John Keel to tell him that in Liverpool, England, back when his book Operation Trojan Horse came out, that there were some hippies, and he was among them, that were really intrigued with his trippy book. But anyway, so I hadn't told anybody in this meeting what I was about to reveal, and so we took a break, and after the break I was going to play this tape, but before I did, the host of the group, she announced to everybody that there was someone that had something that they wanted to tell. So before we proceeded further, he was going to tell us something that he thought was quite important. And what he said was that he had a deja vu about 10 or 15 years earlier, and he saw me and my wife and a friend of mine that I brought to the meeting, a group of us standing there, and he never knew what it meant. And then at this meeting, all of us came together all these years later, and this was vivid in his mind. And then I played the audio where, Anthony Peck is talking about deja vu, and this is what this guy had experienced years earlier.
Well, now, so what do you conclude on this? I mean, is there an intelligence behind these synchronicities and this deja vu, or and the coincidences, or is it all just a random shot in the dark?
I don't think it's all a shot in the dark. Certainly not. But then, I kind of go back to Harold Sherman, the well-known author on paranormal.
Oh my goodness, yes. I'm still in touch with his from time to time, his daughter, and people always talk about little green men. Well, I got the inside scoop. The term green man, you know where it came from? It came from an article that Harold Sherman wrote for Amazing Stories for Ray Palmer back in the 1940s.
Right. Didn't he produce a book on Little Green Men?
Yeah.
A novel.
Yeah. It's based on the Green Man Returns. I still have some copies on the back shelf there. I think I had bought when book sales were really going well back in the 1980s when before the internet came along and smacked us a good one. You know, we were selling stuff, like that, and now, of course, the internet has come along and taken a lot of the thunder out of, the publishing business, and you've got to rely pretty much on, Amazon in order to get the word out. And of course, now you've got everyone is a writer, and so you've got 4 million or 5 million books to compete with, maybe more even. It's not quite the same ball game.
Yeah. But I think of what Harold Sherman used to say, that like attracts like, like attracts like in the realm of mind, and he had kind of a little induction where you relax and do the progressive relaxation, and you kind of focus on your mind's eye, and for various seeing of the future or the astral travel or whatever it was you wanted to do.
He had a whole series of cassettes. In fact, some of those we turned into audio with CDs. I've since lost the masters and things. We've gone through so many different titles and so many different audios and videos. And in fact, even on YouTube now, we got something like 165 presentations. Mm-hmm. I mean, every week we had one or two. And in fact, there's a very good presentation up there about Stella Lansing, if anybody wants to take a look at what we were talking about earlier in the program. We also visit Charles Schwartz's grave, which is in the rural cemetery in Albany, New York. We spend the afternoon with Tom Dongo down in Sedona, and you mentioned the person, and probably they have been on our program, or they're dying to get on. And since some of them are deceased, they've already died to get on, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, that reminds me of Stella Lansing. First time I went down to see her, my friend Jim Carey from Maine, also at the time, and we drove down there and came back really late in the morning. I think it was around 4 o'clock, I believe, in the morning, and I found out later that either around 4 o'clock that morning or the other morning, we couldn't exactly pinpoint for sure what morning, but that an aunt of mine who lived down the hill from me got up to go to the bathroom at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she happened to look out the window and saw this unusual display of a ring of lights flying silently across the sky. And it made me think of the Clockwork images that I've been hearing so much about when I was down at Stellar's. Now, on the Clockwork images, I debated about this with Dr. Schwartz on that particular image, because I had gotten some along with some other people, and I contacted Kodak in Rochester, New York, and a technician wrote me back that they were rivets that were attached to like 50-foot long Super 8 millimeter film strips for continuous development through their vat at the time. But at the time I wrote to them, they were discontinuing that program, and I tried to get them to send me a rivet to show to Stellar and to Dr. Schwartz, and they never did do that. But it kind of made sense that maybe it was something like that, because usually it was around the beginning or the end of, the ones I had, the 50-foot strips, and it would, as you say, it used to overlap the film, and it would sort of be, you could see it on one side of the film, where it was sort of like pressed into the film, and then you turn it over and it wouldn't be on the other side. So I kind of thought that was a possible explanation. I know Dr. Schwartz had consulted with Augie Roberts, who was quite familiar with photography, and someone who was a professor, and he told Stella Lansing about it, and she called me up one day to rake me over the coals. Why didn't you contact me about this? Why did you contact Kodak? I know about Kodak. I've been in touch with him. This can't, she was kind of irate with me. I had to calm her down. She got kind of emotional on the subject, but I'm certainly not. I've heard other stories from other people of strange things they've seen in her presence, and I know when when I was there, my friend Jim Carey, he said he was looking across this body of water. She lived near a little lake, and he saw something that, like, at a house, I think there was, like, one moment there was a fence in front of it, and the next moment it was gone. And so, I mean, people see things, report things, you know, in her presence that, you know, kind of strange.
Well, that's why we've included her in our book, UFO Repeaters, because there does seem to be a select group of individuals who have the uncanny ability. You remember Ted Serios, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Who had this gizmo that he would hold up to his forehead and strain and stress and make all kinds of faces, and then take a camera, I think a Polaroid camera, right?
Polaroid,
yeah. Polaroid, and snap the pictures, and there would be images that they would find, you know, later on were of far distant places where he had never been.
Yeah, and Dr. Hynek attended one of the sessions. That Dr. Jewel Eisenbud, who wrote the book The World of Ted Serios, was a psychiatrist. Right. Yeah, he had a number of people, academic-type people, professional, to participate in the sessions. And Dr. Hynek was one of them. Because I guess we know a little more about Dr. Hynek. He was more interested in strange things going back to childhood than we realized, you know.
Oh yes, well I remember I did an interview with him one time, and he talked about the Men in Black. He talked about a case where a police officer was actually, I guess, chasing one of these black Cadillacs down a lonely road, and the vehicle disappeared right in front of the police officer.
Well, you know, I met him at his home back in September of '72. I went Great Lakes Naval Training Academy when I was, you know, joined the Navy back then, and so I was right outside Chicago, Evanston, and so I bought his book and went to see him and you know, chat with him a while, and I was surprised at the time that I was kind of skeptical. I was going through a little skeptical phase about John Keel, and he actually defended him. He said, well, I find his ideas quite interesting, you know. I think you know, and then later I learned that during the Hudson Valley activity that it was Dr. Hynek that suggested they look at certain ancient monuments, Indian mounds, landmarks of any kind that might be there, and they did, and lo and behold, they found that some of the activity was very strange activity occurred around some standing stones and such in that area.
That's correct. In fact, this past weekend, I along with my associate here, Carol Rodriguez, and my niece, Dorianne, we took a trip up to Pine Bush, New York, which is just outside the Hudson Valley, for the 5th annual Pine Bush UFO Festival and Parade. You know, Pine Bush and the Hudson Valley in the 1980s was the hub of UFO activity. In fact, the Hudson Valley had as many witnesses, if not more, than the very famous Phoenix Light. There was one incident where I think about 200 cars had pulled up to the side of the parkway, and they looked up and they saw this giant boomerang-shaped craft silently glide overhead. And that's when Dr. Hynek and Jacques Vallée, they came to Brewster, New York, and they had a town hall meeting. And that's the first time I ever heard Larry Warren tell his story about his involvement in the Bentwaters or Rendlesham Forest UFO landing, which has been the hotly debated in recent times and is starting to cause quite a controversy. And anyway, that for a while, Pine Bush was the hub of UFO activity. There was a young lady by the name of Ellen Crystal, who's now deceased, and Harry Levelson, who worked for Omni magazine. And they would go up there and on a regular basis have fairly close encounters. And Ellen wrote a book alien invasion, and she had some very incredible photographs that she took, some of which are in our UFO Repeaters book. And there's still people having sightings up there now, and the town celebrates every year with a UFO festival. They have a few speakers. In fact, Travis Walton was there, Peter Robbins, who lives nearby, Linda Zimmerman, who's written a couple of books on the Hudson Valley UFO flap. And it's quite a little event. I mean, it's no Roswell or anything, but it's about the only thing going on the East Coast. And I don't know, how many towns do you think now have a UFO festival? You've got McMinnville, you got the Mothman Festival down in West Virginia, and so I guess...
and you've got the up around Hopkinsville, Kentucky now. You've got the that one based on the Little Men sighting back in August 1955.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites, of course. The little entities on the roof that they shot at, and then they would just Hopkinsville. Yeah, they would just roll off the kind of the roof like the bullets were, they're made out of rubber or something like that.
Yeah, I interviewed one of Mr. Sutton's daughters.
Yes, she did. That's an interesting thing. She actually wrote a book. I heard her on one show somewhere on the internet, maybe even your program. I'm not sure. And then she disappeared. Even Woody Nierenberger's daughter wrote a book like 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe she didn't write the book. They republished Visitors from Landulos, and she did one show, and then you never heard anything more about her. And I tried to get her on the program, and never heard back from her, and things along that line. I mean, just kind of very strange. But
yeah, I think it was like September last year that I had contacted her, and she was quite accessible at that time. So I think she's on Facebook.
Well, we've had on our program Kenneth Arnold's granddaughter. And in fact, now here's the synchronicity that you're probably familiar with. I call it the June 24th Enigma. June 24th is the anniversary, of course, of Kenneth Arnold's UFO sighting over Mount Rainier. Now, most people do not realize that Kenneth Arnold had upwards of 15 other UFO sightings in later years, and he also had other paranormal experiences, rather bizarre ones, including a rocking chair that supposedly moved by himself. There was an angel in the tree outside of his home. We know about the fact that his hotel room was bugged, in the Maury Island incident. Well, of course, on June 24th, there have been about a dozen UFO researchers that have passed away. UFO researchers are those interested in the subject.
Right. Frank Edwards was one of them.
Okay, Frank Edwards.
Yeah.
How about Frank Scully?
Right.
I
didn't know that.
This was June 24th. Jackie Gleason, who, of course, was a regular guest on the Long John Neville show and has one of the largest occult libraries, which is now at the University of Miami. And there was let me see, quite a number of other researchers that have been. Frank Edwards' publisher, Lyle Stewart, passed away on June 24th. And there's quite a list. I mean, it's longer than most people would suspect. But here's the punchline and the synchronicity. Now, most people, like I say, know about Kenneth Arnold's sighting over Mount Rainier. He described these crescent-shaped objects. They look like they were skipping over water. That's how the term flying saucer came about. But what most people do not realize is that Kenneth Arnold did not, I repeat, did not believe that the objects that he saw were extraterrestrial. He believed that they were some sort of vessel. I guess that's the best term that I can think of. Vessel that was coming over to take the souls or spirits of individuals into the next next world. Now, that's a pretty strange concept, but isn't it even stranger in certainly a synchronicity that so many UFO researchers have passed away on the anniversary of his initial sighting, and that was his belief, his concept, is that these vehicles were coming to pick up the souls of the departed.
Wow, well, Tim, that's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Hey, you're talking to Mr. UFO.
Well.
And people ask me, they say, "What do you think about this?" or "What do you think about that?" And you know what my standard answer is? It doesn't matter what I think about UFOs because they act independently of my thinking or anybody else's. Just when you think you might have a grasp on the situation, they'll twist your mind and turn you about and send you in another direction. And I have one last story here that I want to.
Okay. Yeah.
My first publisher. Of course, we have now. If you go to Amazon.com and you type in Interlight Global Communications Global Communications, which is my publishing company. I've been putting out UFO and paranormal books since the tender age of 14, when I went out and bought a mimeograph machine and started cranking out a newsletter. Okay, we now have about 260 books. I haven't written them all, but my name is on most of them as editor. We published books by Brad Steiger, T. Love Sincarampa, Richard Sennett, Sean Castile, Tim Schwartz.
One by Brent Rain.
Yeah.
Don't forget that one.
This guy, this very well-known researcher from Tennessee. Yeah. Anyway, so we put out a variety of books. You know, when people ask my opinion, I say, I pick some books because I like the subject matter, or I think that they have something to say. Those are usually the ones that don't sell. And then there are the books that I publish because other people may be interested in them, even though I may not have a particular fascination with a particular topic. Anyway, so we've got, like I say, about 260 books. But I started out when I was a teenager, and my first publisher was a gentleman by the name of Ray Parker, who had a company called Serios and Hynek. I believe that the first book that I did for him was The Shaver Mystery and the Inner Earth, which is still in print, although it's been retitled Subterranean World Inside Earth. Okay, so this was about at the age of maybe 15, 16. I'd have to look up the date when the books were published, but I was still wet behind the ears in those days. It's been a long journey, man. Let me tell you, it has been a long, long journey.
Oh, yeah.
And, okay, back when I was in the 4th grade, I had to pick a book to do a book review. Now, I never particularly liked English. I was not a good student. I didn't get along very well with the teachers. They irritated me. For example, I was always interested in astronomy. In fact, I was vice president of the astronomy club in school. Well, I did a report on astronomy, and the teacher gave me a D-. Why did he give me a D-? Because he said I had to copy it from somewhere. Well, I'd like to tell you what I think of that teacher, but I'm sure that this is a family show. I hope he has somewhere in the lower regions of hell and has to write on a chalkboard with a hot piece of coal over and over again. I will not try to humiliate Tim Beckley. For all eternity, I hope he has to write that. Anyway, I did a book report, and what book did I select? But They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Ray Parker. Lo and behold, I got a B+ on the book report. Different teacher, but than the one who graded me on the astronomy report, and I was very pleased. Well, of course, little did I know that 8 or 10 years later, Ray Barker would be publishing my books. How could I possibly have known that? And in addition, when he passed away, I bought the last 50 hardcover editions of They Knew Too Much from his estate, and I still have a few on the back shelf here. So that's certainly a synchronicity, a hardcore synchronicity, if there ever was one. So synchronicities are totally out of this world, and anybody who is interested in the subject, all they got to do is go to Amazon.com and look for the book, The Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick. And the subtitle is, And the Paranormal Synchronicities of Timothy Green Beckley. But you don't have to remember that all. Just remember Matrix and Philip K. Dick, and you'll find the book. Or you get in touch with me at MrUFO8@hotmail.com. And if you order by PayPal, I'll give you a discount and throw in a free DVD if you tell me you heard it on the show here. All right?
All right. And by the way, you pointed out to me that Matrix apparently was a term that Philip Dick had generated himself.
Well, I can't say where the term originated. Teleportation is a word that Charles Fort came up with. That's his terminology. And Philip K. Dick, like a lot of science fiction writers, make up their own lingo. I mean, if you look at the titles of the books and some of the things that he talked about, it's in his own code. In fact, he did a book called Valis, V-A-L-I-S, which is tells the story in novel form of his own contact with some other species, individual. It's hard to say exactly what these entities were, this entity was, and he wasn't sure either. But VALIS stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. So Philip K. Dick had terms for just about everything, just like John C. Lilly's Earth Coincidence Control Center, which is known as ECHO for short. So, hey, if you got some weird synchronicities, not just running into somebody on the street that you were thinking about, or you look up and it's 11:11 on the clock, let me know, because I'll include them in the next edition of the book.
All right. Sounds good. Very interesting subject matter we've had here. Tim, I sure appreciate you doing this program with me, and I've been very engaging, very fascinating subjects and stories.
Well, I thank you for having me on your program. You're one of the leading lights of the paranormal yourself. You've been doing this maybe a few years shorter than I have, but you're certainly been out there plugging away at it, and your publication remains one of my favorites, and I've got copies when I was buying them on the newsstand.
Oh wow! Well, I appreciate it. I got your UFO universe.
Well, before that we were doing UFO review, and if you look around, we were doing before that the Searchlight, which was about the Shaver mystery, and the first one was the Interplanetary News Service report. And I actually did a book that was done in what I call invisible ink, a ditto machine. It was called Inside the Saucers, 1962, and I don't even have a copy of it. It probably would have evaporated by now, although my friend Rick Hilberg said that he has one in his file. So one of these days I'm going to have him make a Xerox copy of it if it'll come out, because it's in fading purple ink. And it was one of the first books published that actually talked about German and Nazi constructed UFOs. But that's for another program, and we will do this again.
Well, great. And Rick's probably been in the field about as long as you have.
Yeah, yes, we all met each other when we were probably 13 or 14 years old through Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine. He used to have a column in there called The Flying Saucer News.
Right, and I've got some of your articles in the early Flying Saucers, Ray Palmer's magazine, back when you took over Gray Barker's column there on the trail.
On the trail of the Flying Saucers, and we put all those old columns and all the articles that I wrote for UFO Report, which was the Saga UFO magazine, into a book called Strange Saga, which you can get on Amazon. And it's so dirt cheap because I want to share those early columns and articles, which were some of my best, with people who are not familiar with my earlier works.
That's right. You sent me a copy a few years ago, which is right over here on the shelf, about 4 feet from me.
There you go. It should be closer.
Well, I'll move over closer. But anyway, well, thank you, Tim, and I'm sure our listeners will find this interview quite interesting. We've covered a lot of ground, and yes, we need to do this again. So, and thank you very much, and you take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. You have a good evening.
All right. You too, Tim. We'll see you. All right, and that was a nearly hour and a half interview, conversation with Timothy Beckley, longtime researcher going back to the 1950s of paranormal UFOs, called Mr. UFO by many people. Has contributed a great deal of literature, and recently he has written a book on Philip K. Dick, well-known novelist who also claimed to have had very unusual paranormal star visitor type experiences. So anyway, that's it for the June issue of Alternate Perceptions interview here with Tim Beckley. Stay tuned for future interviews, and also in this issue you will also can listen to an audio interview with a Bill Puckett out in Montana, who has a meteorologist who has a lot of very interesting UFO cases, radar visual type incidents, and authenticated type reports that he's looked into personally. So take care, everyone, and hope you'll join us for future episodes. All for now. Take care.